that last week I was in the building, I was physically ill at the thought of leaving my good job, but I did, and it's worked out so far. There's no regrets.
And then at the very end, we realised that she and her mum are homeless. And that was obviously very intentional, because that's what it's all about.
Hi, it's Martin Nutty, and you're listening to the Irish Stew podcast. That first voice you heard was Kathleen Harris, director of Birdsong. And the second voice was that of Denise Deegan, screenwriter of The Innkeeper. And in this conversation, featuring very different films, these two women talk about the work they do in carving out their place in the Irish film business. This episode was recorded at the 2025 Capital Irish Film Festival. A big thank you to Solas Nua, Washington, D.C.'s wonderful Irish arts organisation and hosts of the festival, who kindly invited me to record 4 episodes featuring some of the best work of contemporary Irish filmmakers, all ably curated by Maeve McCullough. I'm delighted to announce that we'll be returning to Washington, D.C. from February 26th to March 1st, when we'll be the podcast in residence at the 2026 edition of the festival. For more details, make sure you visit the Solas Nua website. That is solasnua.org. We look forward to seeing you at the festival. Finally, you'll notice the absence of my co-host John Lee in these episodes. Sadly, John's older brother, Daniel Lee, passed away a year ago, shortly before our DC departure. Dan had suffered through a long illness, but the end came abruptly. He was a lifelong educator and leader in independent school education. John tells me Dan's nickname in the family was the Irish King. And so these episodes have been made in the Irish King's memory. May he rest in peace. Now, let's hear from Kathleen Harris and Denise Deegan. Welcome to Irish Stew, Denise Deegan, Kathleen Harris.
Thanks so much, Martin.
So I'm going to start off here very simply because our listeners in Irish Stew, and as a host, I'm always interested in questions of Irish identity. 2 Irish names, but different accents. I will start with you, Kathleen. I can't imagine a more Irish name, but your accent isn't Irish. So tell me a little bit about your Irish identity.
Sure. Yes, my mom is from Sligo, grew up there in Strandhill, and my father is originally from New York, and they met in Texas. And they raised us kids in Texas. So I was there until I was in my late teens and lived in New York for a while, Boston, Maryland, a few different places. And then we all moved to Ireland when I was an adult.
So that sounds like an army life. Is that what that was?
No.
Because a lot of times I'll hear those stories and it's usually families that father or mother's in the military.
No, so my father was an architect. We did move to the Northeast for his work. I ended up in Maryland and Boston for college.
Okay.
Yeah. And eventually I followed them over. They moved over to Ireland a few months before I did. And I thought, why not? I'll go over there and spend some time there. I thought maybe I'd spend a couple of years there. But yeah, almost 20 years later and I'm still there.
And so your father got dragged to Ireland kicking and screaming, or?
He wasn't kicking and screaming on the way there, although he probably did plenty of that once he got there. Rural Sligo is a bit of an adjustment for him, but he always loved Ireland. He had grandparents from Ireland, the Fallons. But yeah, he loved Ireland. We spent a lot of summers coming over there, and we could. My mother was always keen to visit home, so my father grew to love it.
And you mentioned the fact that you grew up in Texas, but you went to school on the East Coast. I'm guessing you pursued a career in journalism in college. Was that your entree point? Because you did become a video journalist, and you've had, 8 years in the Irish Times?
That's right. Actually, I studied in both the States and in Ireland. So I was in DCU in Trinity back in Ireland, and I was in Boston University. And yeah, I was actually here in Maryland in a small liberal arts school for a time as well. So I studied communications, journalism, political science, and film. I couldn't get enough of school, clearly. I spent way too much time in school.
Yeah, I'm like the crazy guy that graduated with way too many credits for their undergrad degree because I ended up with 3 minors and a major or some kind of crazy thing. Now, Denise, you are Irish, as in born in Ireland. You're an author of fiction, both young adult novels, but also a novel by the name of Through the Barricades, which you're probably particularly well known for. You've travelled a good bit. When I think of Irish writers, the best ones are the ones that have travelled and lived offshore. I wonder if you reflect on your Irish experience. How has travel and engaging in the broader world changed how you view your country?
I'm very much rebellious in spirit, and I'm from Cork, which is the rebel county. And I have written a book about the Easter Rising and revolution in Ireland. And I feel incredibly Irish. But I was just having a chat with someone from this Solas Nua Film Festival, and we were just talking about people who are American but have some Irish blood and some mix of something else. And what was really interesting was I found myself saying to her, I don't want to do the gene testing in case I'm 100% Irish, because I'd be really bored with that. Because in my mind, I am what they call the Black Irish, which is you've got really dark hair and dark eyes. And so clearly you came to Ireland as part of the Spanish Armada and you got washed up on the shore. And that's why you're so cold all the time. So that's my narrative of who I am. And I don't want to find out that actually, no, you're just Irish, because then my whole narrative is gone.
As we record this in Washington, D.C., we're in the middle of the Capital Irish Film Festival, and both of you have films being featured here. But what I was fascinated about was your careers didn't start out purely in film. And we've alluded to the fact, Denise, that you're primarily a novelist, but I know you've done a whole bunch of other things. And you, Kathleen, were a journalist. And what I read about you, Kathleen, was a couple of years ago, you quit the Irish Times, which I suppose in Irish terms is a kind of a considered to be a plumbing job, the paper of record in Ireland, to go make a film. But that started out, as I understand, with an assignment down in Killarney.
That's right. I didn't realize that was available to read somewhere. So yes, I was a video journalist at the Irish Times for 8 years. I actually worked for them for 10. So it was like the first decade out of college, I went in and worked for the Irish Times. And I really loved that job there. I loved the world of journalism. I was in the newsroom and got to do some really interesting stories, got to visit interesting places. You have access to all these worlds and people. It's such a privilege to be able to sit down and ask people what in another context would be very rude questions. So it was such a great job. I learned so much and got to do some travel and met some amazing journalists. And I just wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to work on long form projects. And I had, like I said, been there for 8 years. And at that point, I wanted something new. And in 2022, my boss at the time, Chris Mataloni, who was the editor, he headed up the video team, he spotted a tweet on what was then Twitter, posted by Seán Ronayne, an ornithologist from Cork. And he was saying that he wanted to record the call of every bird species in Ireland. At the time, we were doing a series of short videos about people with interesting jobs. And Chris thought this sounded interesting. Seán's an ornithologist and a bird surveyor. And he said, would you get in touch with Seán, Kathleen, and see if he'd be up for doing a video with us for the Times, a short video for our website. So I rang up Seán, and he was game for it. He said, yeah, I'm going to be in Killarney National Park this Thursday. This was back in 2022. He had heard that a woodpecker was there, and he had never recorded one. And he was really eager to find it and record it. So he said, you can come and meet me there at dawn in the woods. He sent me like a little pin. And I went off to find him at dawn in Killarney National Park, drove down from Dublin the night before. And we did find the woodpecker. He did record it. And that...
Was you recording the pecking or...
Drumming. He got drumming.
Does it make other sounds other than...
I should know more about birds at this stage than I do, but yes, there would be different types of calls and different sounds. The drumming is from actually pecking at the wood. Some birds make noise with their tail feathers. There's all different types of sounds. And yep, he recorded a woodpecker drumming, and he was so excited about this. And it was such a beautiful moment to see him light up when he heard the woodpecker and record it for the first time. And that scene is in Birdsong, the film that we have here in the festival. And I spent that day with him. We made that short video. It did really well on the website. But that day that I was out with Seán, I asked him that day, do you think you'd be interested in doing a longer project with me? I was just so taken by him. I'm always looking for stories. I covered a lot of environmental stories for the Irish Times. They were stories that interested me, and I was interested in finding ways to cover stories that were environmental in nature, that were about the natural world, but about our relationship with it, to bring in a human story as well. And Seán just really struck me right away as someone who had a scientific mind, knew the science really well, but had such an accessible, poetic way of talking about birds and other animals and the natural world in general. And I just really wanted more people to get to know him, and I wanted to see more people like him on our screens. He's such a gentle, beautiful soul, kind, and just with so much passion and joy for our natural world that, yeah, I was dying to make a longer film with him. And so he agreed, and I pursued it then. I brought the project to Ross Whitaker, who's a documentary filmmaker back in Ireland. He became a producer on the project. We made it for RTE. But before we were able to make it, I considered whether I'd be able to do it while keeping my job in the Irish Times. And I had wanted to make that leap into documentary for a while. So when we got the go-ahead to make this film, I decided to leave. That last week I was in the building. I was physically ill at the thought of leaving my good job, but I did. And yeah, and it's worked out so far. There's no regrets. It's one of the best things I've ever gotten to do, work on Birdsong with Seán and the whole team.
To me, there's three aspects of the film. There is Seán, who is, as you say, a gentle, wonderful soul. There is the birds themselves, and then there is the landscapes that you capture in the film, and they're all extraordinary. But speaking of stars and central characters, and Seán, in movie parlance, is the star of this film in a way, along with the landscape and birds. But speaking of stars, you have a wonderful star in your film.
Our actress, she's wonderful. Yes. Portia is her name. Yes. And she was absolutely stunning. Like we were all casting together, and she walked in. She was 8 years old. Anybody who was 8 or younger, they just didn't have the ability to do the part. She walked in, and everybody was older. A lot of them were good. She just walked in, and there was a very specific moment where I just thought, oh my God, we have to have Portia, because she just encapsulated the character. And this moment, the director was talking to her, and she just had total focus on him. She crossed one leg over the other and looked at him in the eye as if to say, we are going to work. And I just thought, oh my God, it's just fabulous. And she really was. And she just had the spirit of Holly. So Holly, the main character, is this really spirited little kid who gets the part of the innkeeper in the nativity play. And all she has to do is say no to Mary and Joseph. That's her only job. But can she do it? No. And so there's a battle between her and her perfectionist teacher. And it's funny, but she's such a spirit. Portia's just fabulous. And she has won awards in various film festivals. And every single one totally deserved. In fact, I got her a little star in the quiz afterwards, just because she is a star.
She's extraordinary and melted my heart when I watched her. And the story itself is wonderful, but boomeranging back to transitions, you're well known for writing young adult novels. You have the Butterfly series, and we talked about the Barricades novel. Why film? Why not just do your thing, write more novels? There's plenty of stories to tell.
Martin, that would be the absolutely sensible thing to do, and I never do the sensible thing. I've had a lot of life changes, and so many of them are all because a friend asked me to do something and I said yes. So in this case, a friend asked me to do a Screen Ireland course on film. Now, just short course. And I've always been passionate about film and movies, and it really links me to my parents growing up as well. They'd bring us to the movies with sweets and everything. It was just, I just love film. And so I thought, yeah, of course I'll go. And I just became obsessed. It was so fascinating. I did more courses. Then I just got funding from Screen Ireland to write a script. Then I got funding to write another one. They got picked up by various production companies. I started to get television projects picked up. And now it's just what I do. And in fact, it's interesting. I had this idea for a psychological thriller. This is my latest one. And I thought, what I'll do is, it'd be really good to write a novel and a film. And I thought, okay, this is quite plot driven. So sensible thing would be to write the film first and then do the novel. No, couldn't do it. Because when I write a novel, I just write very instinctively and I just let it flow. And it takes me where I'm going.
By headlights, so to speak?
Yeah, the characters, they come to life and they just do their thing. And I just like, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. It's just, I become the characters in a way. And so when I did backwards, I actually couldn't write the novel. I couldn't do it because it was like, it felt like a formal document. It didn't feel like
naturally.
a novel.
Lost its organic quality
yes,
almost.
so now I'm in a crisis. No, I'm not really, I'm joking. I'm being dramatic. I'm not in a crisis, but I'm like, am I ever going to go write another novel? And I have written a book of nonfiction, the little book of Irishisms. And I think I write more nonfiction books, actually. Just silly little books, because I have various ideas and they amuse me. So I think maybe that's... But keep with the screenwriting as well, because I love that.
It's interesting you talk about writing in this organic style, not being very plot-oriented. You basically start off with, I guess, a scenario populated with characters and you don't know where they're going. We had another guest on the podcast, actually he's been on the podcast twice, a lady called Covery Madhavan.
I know Covery.
And it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly how she writes. I can't even imagine that approach. Kathleen, speaking of writing, you work in the nonfiction genre of film, in the documentary space. Your shoot schedule for this film probably had to be fairly extended, I imagine. Unlike fiction-based films, they're kind of like, okay, we're going to do this in 60 days or 30 days or whatever, or maybe longer, I don't know. So talk to me about, you obviously go into this film with some kind of preconceived notion of the scenes you want to capture, what you want to get out of it. So there is some kind of scripting or some kind of storyboard that you plan on doing. I'm just imagining this as a layman looking in the outside after seeing the film. But tell me about that process. How do you decide how long you're going to do this for, what you want to capture, etc.?
Yeah. So we actually ended up filming in every season, but the bulk of the shooting was done within a 3-month period, I think. The days were a bit sporadic. It wasn't all in one go. And our schedule was very much dictated by events that Seán had on, because we covered things like talks that he did and visits to schools and festivals and things like this that we'd shoot with him as those things came up. And then a good bit of it was dictated by the birds themselves. The springtime and early summer is the time when you are able to film most of them that were on our list, because I can't remember how many species of birds he had left. There's about 200 birds that are regularly occurring in Ireland that he decided these are the 200 birds I'm going to record for this project. He had most of them done in the first year, and then the rest were the difficult ones. So rare, endangered, red and amber listed birds. And because they are endangered, because the Wildlife Act, to protect them, you have to have a permit through the National Parks and Wildlife Service to go anywhere near their breeding site. And you go near their breeding site because that's where you're likely to find them and be able to film them or record them. So that has to be done at very strict times to protect the birds. So yeah, we worked according to that. One of the birds, but there was one species in particular, there's only one pair of ring ouzel left in Ireland, and we only had a very short period of time. Like, we were initially told we could spend about half an hour being anywhere near the site, and we couldn't get right up at the site because it wouldn't have been good to go too close. So we had to stay back, and we had a very short window of time to get in there and get out. And we ended up leaving a recorder at the site to pick it up remotely. But yeah, it was an interesting shoot schedule, and based on the birds that Seán had left. I picked out a few that I thought had stories associated with them that might be illustrative of the problems in Ireland, the biodiversity issues that we're facing there. Some of the species I picked out based on the locations. We wanted to go out to Skellig Michael to record species out there. Tory Island sounded interesting. And something I had on my list from the very, very beginning was a starling murmuration at Loch Ennell. That was actually the final scene of the film, and it was the very first thing that we filmed for it. And it appears exactly how I pictured it in my head from the very beginning. Ross Bartley, who is our cinematographer, did an absolutely amazing job capturing that murmuration. That was probably the most planned out scene, and we did reconnaissance trips out there a couple of times. We had great help from an amazing Irish photographer called James Crombie, who specializes in starling murmurations at Loch Ennell. So he helped us out, and we were able to film that basically exactly how it was storyboarded. So that was the best planned of everything. Everything else was a little, let's go and see if the birds show up and hope that they do. And if they don't, then we'll either have to find another species to focus on or construct a narrative out of what we get.
Yeah, watching the murmuration that you captured on film, that 5-7 minutes or whatever it is of film is more than worth the price of admission. It's extraordinary, and you realize just how spectacular the natural world is. It makes my heart sing. But it's interesting because you mentioned the biodiversity crisis. And the other thing that I liked about the film was it quietly made the case that this is the issue. Sometimes you watch films about nature and there's almost a scold, like quality of finger shaking kind of thing coming at you. And one of my takeaways from the film, when you're trying to film the ring-ouzels, these very rare birds, it captured the sense of sorrow of something that may be lost. It allowed you space for you to draw your own conclusions. And I don't know if that was something that you decided to do, but it came across strongly in a way. And this is something that's important, that needs our care and needs to be saved.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear that was how you read it. And it was very intentional, actually. I worked very closely with our amazing editor, Iseult Howlett, to structure this all out. And we did have many conversations about, okay, when do we introduce the bad side of this, and do we alternate it with scenes like this scene? If we had a scene that was very positive, do we then go to a scene that maybe offers a little bit of insight into the biodiversity crisis and so on? So we were very careful about how we talked about it and what points we talked about it, how much of that there was in it. And we always wanted to end up in a place that wasn't necessarily angry. It was maybe sad, regretful maybe, but ultimately inspiring. So I
Mission accomplished.
Good. I wanted it to be inspiring. The film's not necessarily for people who don't already have an interest in these issues. I'm okay with preaching to the converted, as it were. What I would like it to do is for people who do have an interest in the environment, in birds, in wildlife, some interest in it. I would love if they saw films like ours and thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I learned something here, and to feel maybe a little bit more motivated, galvanized. I know there's a lot of climate anxiety out there, and a lot of things are tough. There's a lot of bad news at the moment, and people end up feeling a bit lonely and a bit, what's the word? It's hard to feel like there's hope sometimes, or that there's maybe something that is worth doing. And so I hope that the film, things like this, maybe even for a moment, spark some kind of inspiration in people, I think.
Get out and engage and protect.
Yeah, exactly. Iseult, our editor, she said that the day after the film had its premiere at Dublin Film Festival, a friend of hers said that her kids went outside the next day and brought phones out with them trying to record the birds in the trees outside. And that just, when I hear things like that's just really beautiful, and exactly, you can't wish for something more than that, I think.
Yeah, make people engage in this soundscape that they may have taken for granted and all of a sudden realize that it is special. I'm going to switch back over to Denise, because in any film, and yours is a short, there is a primary narrative and then there's underlying stories. And what's beautiful about your film, it is, in a way, a retelling of the nativity. But the nativity story, of course, is a story in of itself, but it's what surrounds the nativity and what it means. And clearly there are elements of the issue of housing, which is a huge issue in Ireland right now, the lack of housing and accommodation, which is in many respects one of the central stories of the nativity. There was no room at the inn. And it's also about, let's say, in many Western countries, the hostility may be directed, or the challenges that migrants feel. Talk to me about the deliberateness of that film. Am I misreading this, or was that what you were going for? And I don't want to give away too much of the film because I want people to see that, but they seem like the themes that you're hit.
Yeah, I think we probably will have to give away the ending if we're talking about the theme, because it's a little like what you were saying about Birdsong, that there's a message there, but you don't want to clobber people over the head with it. So people are just going along with the journey. It's, oh my goodness, I was like that in school. I was never picked for anything. I completely relate to this kid. And oh, someone's being really mean to her. And I'm totally with her. And also I'm laughing because it's funny. And then at the very end, you just go, whoa, this is what it's about. So we were talking earlier about the fact that her only job is to say no to Mary and Joseph. And we just think that's funny. And we're laughing along. And then at the very end, we realise that she and her mum are homeless. And that was obviously very intentional because that's what it's all about. But it comes at the very end, in the very last scene, in the very last moment. And I think people have told me that they've been very moved by it. And I wanted that because something happened in Dublin. There was a horrible word, but it was a cleanup operation by the canal in Dublin. And they were bringing along some sort of machine and scooping up tents where people were sleeping. And unfortunately, there was a young man still in a tent who was really badly injured. And I was really upset and really angry by this. And if I'd been a lawyer, I would have done a pro bono thing, sorted him out, and hopefully got him off the streets and been a savior. But I couldn't do it because I'm not a lawyer. So what happened was the story just came to me actually in a kind of a bolt of almost like a gift that I don't even feel I wrote it in a way. It was just something that just arrived to me. That sounds pretentious, but I think a lot of writers have that experience that it's almost, I can't remember who said this. I remember reading that a story is gifted to you, and if you don't take it, it will go to someone else or whatever. So anyway, that's what I feel about The Innkeeper. That story needed to be told. And at that very time, I was the person. And obviously you have to craft it and you have to work in it and you have to make it funnier in places and you have to... There was another plot line that I brought in as well, which sounds like a lot of plot going on in a tiny short, but it comes together, it works. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like to me like a finely crafted short story.
No, thank you.
In the best of Irish traditions, then. It makes the case for shorts. I sat down with Declan Curran yesterday, who also has a short in the festival, and I was curious about his experience and why he has chosen to make, I think he's made 4 shorts. Where's the market for that? How do you get them seen and all that stuff, all that challenge? What's next, given this experience, and where do you hope to take things from here?
I love shorts. I'm obsessed by them because I do think you can say one very big thing in a very small way. So I have another short that I would love to get made. So that's in the works at the moment, but also at the same time, because writers have to always be juggling loads of things to survive. I have some features that are with production companies. I have 2 TV series. Last year, I got selected onto various programs that were European. So I have some projects with other European writers, which is amazing fun. Like, we're having such a good time. Some of the projects are hilarious. And there are certain themes that I always return to in my work, which I think is a really interesting thing about writers. Like, The theme of loss is huge in all my work, and injustice, and it always keeps coming up. And even if I'm writing about something else, it'll somehow find its way in and take over. And I love that, and I always let that happen. But I always go with an idea that comes to me. For example, I'm writing in lots of different genres, which, again, people are thinking, are you crazy? But the stories all are around the theme of loss. So it's not crazy. It's just a different way of expressing something that obviously means an awful lot to me as a person. So like one of my TV series is comedy horror. Then I have a feature that's an intergenerational buddy movie between an older woman and a child. I love kids. I'm obsessed with kids. So a lot of kids in my stories. But I also love the idea of young people and old people and what they can give each other. So I have 2 stories with that theme. I have a psychological thriller, but that's also around loss. So this is what happens. I just do what comes to me. What arrives to me, I work on. Yeah.
The word fecund jumps to mind thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, I've never done anything that is the norm or the recommended route. Like what did I do? And everybody thought, are you mad? I was running a PR business and I gave it up to write books. And I had no publisher, I had no agent, and I hadn't even a book. Imagine, are you mad? And yet I did it, and within 6 months I had a book, an agent, and a publisher. So sometimes you just have to do stuff.
Just jump in.
Yeah.
Jump in and do it.
Just go with your gut.
Yes, and I hate to use the Nike just do it thing, but there's something about that. And I was talking to other people at this great gathering that we're at right now in Washington, D.C., and I said, we need a few more people believing that they can make stuff, that they don't just have to be passive consumers. It doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest thing in the world. Get started, try it. You're going to fail, you're going to have problems, but you're going to learn. And when you're learning, you're growing. And speaking of growing, what's next on your agenda, Kathleen?
Yeah, it's a busy year. We've just wrapped another 1 hour for RT. I don't know if I can say what that's about, but I can say that it's about trauma. That's probably the best way to sum it up. And then I'm going into production on a feature-length film later this year with Screen Ireland, and that will be about 3 women in Ireland who are running an animal sanctuary. This is all that they do. It's amazing. They've given up a lot of themselves, a lot of their lives to take care of horses, pigs, donkeys, goats, sheep. My lovely horse rescue in Kildare. More animals. So yeah, really looking forward to getting stuck into that. And we're also developing another project with Seán at the moment, a follow-up to Birdsong, a feature.
So you've heard it here, folks. Lots more to come from these 2 very accomplished women. Delighted to have the opportunity to sit down with you both and understand a little bit more about your work. I've seen the films, big fan. I'm looking forward to have more chats going forward. So thank you both.
Thanks so much, Martin.
Thank you very much, Juan. Nice to be here.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. We'll be back next week with another conversation from the Capital Irish Film Festival. And both John and I hope that you'll be able to attend this year's edition. The festival will be taking place in Washington, D.C. from February 26th to March 1st. It's always great to meet up with our listeners in person, so we hope you can make it and join us in seeing some great Irish film. I'll post a link to the festival in the show notes, or you can find all the details on the dedicated web page for this episode on our website at irishstewpodcast.com. Finally, a big thank you to our media partner, Irish Central. For all the news on the global Irish, there's no better place than irishcentral.com. And so, until the next time, this is Martin Nutty, and you've been listening to the Irish Stew Podcast. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.